Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another video. Today we're going to be creating a simple chatting tool using TCP sockets in Python. Enjoy! First things first, what are sockets? Sockets are basically the building blocks of networking. As you know, for a connection to exist, we need at least two PCs, and in order for these to be able to communicate, we use what are called sockets. Now, these are objects that handle the outgoing and the incoming traffic. They basically send and receive data. And today we're going to take a closer look at that. So we want to get things started in an empty folder here. We're going to create a new file and we're going to call this one chat.py. And because I do not have Visual Studio, we're going to be editing using Notepad++. I'd highly recommend using Visual Studio for this, and I'm probably going to install it till next time. So we want to get things started by importing the socket module, library, excuse me. And the way this is going to work is we're going to have a server that's going to be hosting, and we're going to have a client that's going to connect to the server. And we're going to achieve this using sockets. On the server part, we're going to bind the socket to our local address. And then on the client part, we're going to connect to the remote address. We're also, in order to bind the address, we're going to need a port. The client is basically going to connect to our IP address at the specified port. The way we're going to do this, I know this is a lot, so we're going to go a little slower. So we're going to create one method for the server, which we're going to call, I don't know, server. And we're going to create a second one that we're going to call client. And we're going to create another method that we're going to call setup. And I'm not going to use a main method for this, I'm just going to call setup from down here. We're going to add the colon here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to say we want to print. We want to let the user choose the type that they, the type of, like how they like to run the script. So please choose type host client. Then we're going to grab the input from the user. So we're going to say choice equals input. And we're just going to put this here so we know that we can enter something. And then we're going to say if, and then host. So if this string is contained within this input, so if that in choice, and we're going to go dot lower, so it actually defaults to lowercase, just in case the user decides to use caps lock. We're just going to check here. Yeah, make sure you're using spaces and not tabs, because Python is indexed using spaces. So if host in choice.lower, we want to go with server. Else if client in choice.lower, we want to go with client. And else we want to do a recursive call, because we chose an incorrect mode. Now the way this is going to work, we're just going to create two global variables here. The first one is IP address. We're going to put this one needs to be a string. So we're going to put this to localhost. And we're going to put the other one needs to be an integer, so we're going to put 443 for now. The ports in your PC obviously have different types. We can use this port for now. It should be available. If it's not, just go with any port you like. Like you can choose a few. There are some that you cannot choose because they're being used, but there are a lot of them that you could just basically use. This IP address, we're obviously hard coding this inside. If you want the client to actually be able to connect to your address and he's on a different network, if he's on the same network, you can just put your IPv4 address in here. You can get your IPv4 address by running ipconfig on Windows or ifconfig on Linux, and you'll see your IPv4 address. And if he's not on the same network, this needs to be your public IP address, and you need to have port forwarding enabled. But because we're testing it on a local machine, we don't need to do any of that. We're going to start with our server function. We want to create a new object. This object is going to be a socket object, and we're going to leave this empty for now. This is not good practice. However, Python will default it to TCP AF INET. Now what AF INET means is it's basically an internet connection, and it's the type of the socket is a TCP socket. What exactly that means, you do not need to know right now. What this means, you do not need to know right now. You just need to know that this creates a new socket. What we want to do now is, because we are the server needs to bind the socket. We need to bind the local address. Before we do that, we need to grab these global variables. Now, because this method calls these two, we can just put global in here, so we won't have to write it one time here and one time here. So we're just going to say global IP address and port. And the reason you need to do this is because these are global variables that you're accessing from here. If you do not do this, it's probably going to say that they're not assigned. So you want to do this because they're global variables. Then you want to say s.bind. When you bind the socket, it takes a tuple. The first part of the tuple is the IP address, which is a string, and the second part is the port. This will bind the socket to the local address on the specified port. And after we have bound the socket, what we want to do is we want to start listening for connections. So I say while true. Actually, we want to start listening outside the loop. So s.listen. This is gonna listen for incoming connections with a queue of x, where x is inside the brackets. So in here, you can type the amount of connections that are allowed simultaneously. Any further connections are going to be queued, and they're going to wait until the until earlier connections have been broken off. You can also type in true, and this is just going to keep accepting connections. But for the time being, we just want to accept one connection. With a queue of 1 in this case, and then we want to say while true, and in here we want to accept incoming connections. So we want to say client socket, comma, client address equals socket.accept, and this is gonna accept a new connection. Now this one is going to return a tuple. The first element in the tuple is the client socket that we're going to use to communicate with our client. And the second one is the client address. So we can print this now. Actually, we can say right here, just to know that it's done anything, listening on, and then you can do either this, and then I believe it was at d for integer, and then you say at, you say %, and then you say IP address port, and add as this can basically be replaced by using the plus symbol if you do not know how this works. So just for the sake of keeping it easy, we're just gonna go with we're just gonna concatenate the strings. So we're gonna say actually this one is already a string, so we just say IP address, excuse me, and then we say this one, then we say plus string, because this one is obviously an integer, string port, and this is just basically gonna show us that it has started listening. And then whenever we get a new connection, we want to say print accepted connection from plus client socket. Now we want to say string, and then we want to say client address 0, index 0, and plus that plus string client address index 1. The reason you want to do this is because this is an array, a list, excuse me, and the first element contains the address of the client, and the second one contains the port that he's connecting with. This doesn't really interest us. This doesn't really interest us either, except we want to do anything with this, something with it. So you could just skip this part. This one's completely unnecessary. We just want to see that we have actually connected. Now the next thing would be to actually create the methods for sending and receiving messages. However, before doing this, we're gonna continue with our client. Now the client doesn't need to bind his address because he just needs to connect to the remote address. So we create a new socket object, socket.socket. Again, we don't enter anything here. And we should probably say object right here, just to make it clear. Then we say s.connect, and then we enter the same tuple as before, so IP address, port, and after it has connected, this connect to server. And now we want to start, we're just going to say print connected to plus IP address plus this plus string port. And now we want to start sending and receiving messages. If we want to be able to simultaneously send and receive messages, we're going to need to use multithreading, because once a socket is listening, it will listen for data incoming. We could also say that if no data is incoming, then I'm allowed to send data, but I want both ends to be able to send and receive data simultaneously. So we're just quickly gonna import threading, which is gonna allow us to do multi-threading. Then we're gonna create a new method that we're gonna call send message. And we want one receive message. Now make sure that this one is not called recv, because receive is used by the sockets. If you do that, it's going to interfere with it and you're not going to be able to continue. So just make sure that this says receive as the whole word, if anything. So this one basically create server loop, and this one connect to server, and then this one is gonna be receive and print message, and this one will send messages. And these both take a socket as a parameter. And then we want to go ahead and write down here, underneath this one, we want to say T for thread equals threading dot thread, and this is going to create a new thread. If you want to know exactly what threads are, stay tuned for a video that is coming up. or just go read about it. Basically, this is gonna run in a second thread, so the program will be able to keep running all of the other instructions whilst this one is running at the same time. If you want to know more, as said, go read about it. Otherwise, wait for the video that's coming. Anyway, we're going to say target. So this is going to be the target method. That's going to be that the thread is going to run. So we want to say target and send message. And notice we didn't put brackets here. And then you say args for arguments. And you pass it the client socket. And this is actually going to be the sender thread. And we want a second one that we're gonna call receiver. We're gonna say threading.thread. And this one is gonna be receiving messages. And it's also gonna get the same argument, client socket. We need to start these threads, obviously, so sender.start, receiver.start. And we need to do the same thing down here, so we just copy this bit right here, and we remove this, and make sure that this one says S rather than client socket, because here we only have the S as a socket. Up here we don't use S because S is the server socket. We need to use a client socket in order to be able to communicate with them. So these basically start new threads to send and receive messages. They pass them the client socket. Now send messages is going to take the socket object. It is going to parse an input from the user. So watch this, while true. We want to say socket.send. We want to say bytes, because sockets can only send bytes across. And this is going to be the encoding type for the input. So the encoding type is going to be UTF-8. And here we're going to say input. And we're just going to put that there. So it is going to parse input from the user, convert it to bytes, because in Python 3 it does not automatically do that. And then we send this over the socket to the other end. And that is all we need in our send messages. In our receive messages, we just simply say while true. We want to print whatever we receive from the other end. So we say socket.receive, and this is exactly why you do not want to call this one receive. And then we want to receive the first 4 kilobytes of data. And then we need to decode it, because it is obviously bytes. We need to decode these bytes back to the string that we then print on the screen. So we say decode, and then we enter UTF-8 again. And that is pretty much it. If we run this now, and we say this one is our host, and let me just reopen that one real quick. So as you see, this one's already listening for connections. Here we say client, see it connected to it, and now we can start sending messages across. So we can say hello world, and we can also receive messages, and this can work simultaneously. So that is pretty much it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to hit that like button, and if you haven't yet, then make sure to subscribe. The code is going to be on GitHub, so you can take a closer look at it. If you still didn't understand fully how these work, that is absolutely fine. Networking is a little hard to understand at first, but you'll eventually get it. This was the first video in the new series. Stay tuned for the next one. We're going to continue with sending files across sockets. We're going to build our own netcat after that, and a few more cool things. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.